Everyone is vulnerable to being pinned when life plays hardball, whether it is a physical or mental health condition. No one can stand alone. For those who are not pinned, appreciate that it could be you or loved one someday. So when you see a chance to help someone, please do. They are not weak, they are pinned. Even a slight hand up and a listening ear can begin seriously lightening the load, change, or save a life. Help end stigma. Move from being pinned to purpose. Time for a hand up.
Hello, everyone. It's Jeff Moore. I'm the founder of the Pin to Purpose podcast, and I'm very pleased today to welcome our guest, Peter J. Kelly. And I'm going to just read a bit of his bio for everybody to start. We had a little technical glitch last time we put this together, so we're gonna just go over the bio and then we'll get started. So in terms of Peter's professional background, Peter is renowned for his 24-year tenure as a senior psychologist at the UK Health and Safety Executive, HSE, where he played a pivotal role in encouraging employers to prioritize positive mental health outcomes for workers. In terms of leadership and advocacy, Peter is the founder and director of Being Real Workplace Mental Health Solutions and serves as mental health advisor to the charity Mates in Mind and the Forcer Protocol. His leadership in the field is further demonstrated by his involvement in developing the 2004 UK Stress Management Standard, the first of its kind globally, and his role as a technical committee member for ISO 45003, the first international standard for psychological health and safety at work. The British Standard for Suicide Prevention, BS 30480. This is the first standard in the world for suicide prevention of its kind. A passionate advocate for workplace mental health, Peter is widely recognized as a subject matter expert in this area. And so, Peter, welcome to our podcast today. And I'll hand it over to you to say a few introductory words.
Oh, thank you, Jeff. Yeah, I mean, I did do some work in the middle of all that. I know there's a lot of standards work in there. I actually was an health and safety inspector for 26 years. So much of this work that we discussed happened when I was working for the UK government as a regulator. Worked a lot with Total Worker Health and NIOSH, and worked on mental health and also lastly I left my role as an inspector and I started my own business called Being Real Workplace Mental Health Solutions, named after my dad.
Fantastic.
Because my dad said, what do you do, son? And I told him that 6 years ago. I said, well, I look after people's mental health at work, Dad. And then he said, why aren't people being real about mental health? So I told him that if I ever started a company, we'd call it Being Real. And that's what it's, for me, it's all about. I've spent a long time in my working life trying to take a subject that people said we couldn't do anything about to make it doable. When I first started out in this trip was in 1998. And I never I was always going to be a great clinical psychologist. That was my thing. And in the end, I found something that was a niche, something that made me think. I used to see people for assessments, and then clinically, 50% of those people were depressed or anxious due to work. So I was like, well, we're not doing the right thing here. We're waiting until they're ill. So that got me interested in working from a regulatory perspective, and it's been an interesting trip. So it starts out as a job and becomes a mission, and along that way, the evidence has been really important, and I've tried to bring the right evidence in. If we didn't have it, we went and researched it, and we got the evidence. And to produce something for the whole of the UK, we needed to be confident about the psychometric properties, whether or not the evidence was solid, and then to make the argument. So Yeah, so I look back now and I can see the things I've been involved in, and they will make a difference. That, you know, or they can make a difference.
Going back prior to 1998, were there other things early in your life that made you think that this is something you would want to do over time, or were you either seeing these types of challenges or experiencing things, or how did you lead into your interest in the field, um, prior
Yeah,
to 1998, let's say?
yeah. I had an acute episode of depression and anxiety just before we launched the management standards.
Wow.
So the management standards was launched in 2004, and in 2002, uh, I had a very acute moment where I'm sat in my office, I'm doing the regulatory bit, we're all going along swimmingly, and I just started crying. I felt overwhelmed. I didn't know how to work my way through it, and I did what every man does, and I phoned my mum,
Mm,
um, and I said, "Mum, blah, 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 this is happening." And mum said, "Look, you know what? You need to go, and you need to go and see a doctor." And I went to see my doctor, and I got signed off for 6 weeks. Now I got back in 6 weeks because I recommended 6 weeks as the minimum time before people should be back at work. Yeah, so I think I had that. Up until that, I'd had the professional awareness and experience because I'd worked with people clinically, but I hadn't actually been through
mm,
one of those episodes. So it kind of it massively engaged my work perspective, which was to say, actually, I remember sharing it with a group of investment bankers. We were in London. It was about 2004. I said, how many? If the one in four of us, or one in five of us at the time, were going to experience depression, anxiety, and there's 15 of us, who are the three in this room? And I put my hand up and said, I'm one of them. And they were like, no, but you can't be. You're like this psychologist. But because I think that was the start of that being real journey, wasn't it? I've always
mm,
open about my mental health.
mm,
If I get tired, it comes like a wave. I've spoken about the tidal wave that we're seeing of mental ill health since lockdown. The progression of anxiety and depression, and how we are now seeing more and more cases of people. 25% increase in depression, 25% increase in anxiety, and 12% increase in suicide globally.
mm.
All right, so the numbers are rising. Here's the interesting thing, Jeff. Go back to 1917 and the Spanish flu pandemic. Look at the preceding 10 years after that, and if you look at the annals of psychiatric history, you'll hear of people suffering mass mental health issues, depression and anxiety. And we also had the Great Depression on the back of it.
Mm.
Look at what we're facing now: a cost of living crisis and an explosion of mental ill health. So we need to learn from our past, and prepare ourselves better for the next pandemic, because it will come. And if we can learn and use all the learning that we've done now about mental health, we can manage that better.
Well, thanks for sharing also part of your personal journey. This is so important. And as you said, it's important for listeners and others to realize, even if you're an expert in this space and are doing, very important work to help others, it doesn't take away from our own individual humanity and the challenges we could face. So thank you for sharing that. Getting into some more of the specifics and how this is evolving, and you're talking about the backdrop that unfortunately is leading to greater incidences of mental health challenges and issues, and the higher numbers in suicide. But so if you can maybe share, if you'd like, some of the highlights of in the ISO 45003, or whatever you'd like to mention in terms of that, and then we can talk about other things if that works for you.
Yeah, absolutely. So ISO 45003 is an international standard looking at psychosocial risk factors in work and how they impact people, and they become hazards. So, so effectively, you have hazards in the workplace, such as high demands, low control, lack of support, bullying, harassment, and multiple of these things are psychosocial hazards. If they're not managed correctly, they become psychosocial risks. And those risks are what there is an expectation that you should be managing that. Now, the legislation globally allows for organizations or requires organizations to manage risk at work. And it's not just physical risk, it's psychological risk as well. So when you say, I'm just going to wait till somebody is ill, well, actually, the breach has occurred because you're not managing their exposure to the hazard. And ISO 45003 sets out 8 clauses. So it's a clause to 1 to 10. The first 2 are descriptors, but there are, from 3 onwards, it sets out principles of things that you need to do. It defines what the problem is, what's a hazard, what's a risk. It defines what kind of hazards exist and what the risk might look like. It then puts in recommendations for tackling those risks based on the legal structures around in each individual country. So, for example, Australia has psychosocial risk framework embedded in the last year. So that requires organizations to manage the exposure to psychosocial hazards. And if they're not managing, they become the risk, and they've got to manage the risk. Yeah. Total Worker Health was attempting to do that through NIOSH, which was to say there are things in work that can directly impact the outcome. So if you have an accident, it may be that accident occurred because actually there are these psychological factors that are not being addressed. So you're required to take a call from your office when you're in the middle of a safety critical role. You take the call because you feel you have to, but then the risk is elevated because you're distracted. So it's things like that. And NIOSH and the UK legislation and European legislation has looked at that and gone, how do you manage those hazards? So it gives you interventions that you can look at, the type of things you can do, when you can do it, for how long you can do it. It talks about engagement, it talks about people feeling that they're part of the process. And it's just like anything else. It's a mental health hazard is the same criteria as someone being exposed to asbestos or welding or actually falling off a scaffolding, not having any harness on. But we tackle the safety without considering what was the psychological characteristics. So when I was working, my job was to think what psychologically was going on that potentially ended up in this traumatic incident occurring. And if you can others call it human factors. They're different elements, but it's these things that happen where the human is part of that. So, so for the 45,003, we put those processes in and that procedure in, and it was adopted by 74 countries, which means that it could be used across 74 countries. Each country is choosing to do their own implementation. So I've always argued that if we have a standard for welding, and that's what they call a defined standard, so it's required by legislation, why shouldn't we have a defined standard for mental health or psychosocial risk?
Yes,
that leads to mental ill health. Currently, it's voluntary, but some South American countries have adopted it into legislation and made it a defined standard. So I think that's the next iteration of the ISO 45003.
And when was ISO 45003 put in place, or when was that?
2022.
2022.
We developed the standard initially meetings in Dallas, and then the pandemic hit. And then the standard was developed online with 74 countries dialing in on Zoom calls and defining criterias and going off and doing the work. And when you do a standard, you have expert advisors, and then you have standard experts. And so our job is to say the evidence is this. These are the things that might work, and the standards people then have to put it into standards language. So sometimes there's a debate about, well, what do we mean by this term and by that term? So when we were doing the ISO 45003, what we did was we ended up in lots of debates, and they're online, and we were bringing it out. And I said, if there's ever a standard, that was meant to happen after a pandemic, it was this, because it was the perfect standard to go to people to say, okay, we've changed the way we work. We've suddenly allowed people to work from home, or we've allowed flexible working. We've allowed a whole range of other things. But we've also now struggling to about how do you bring people back to work and how do you do that? So the standard itself was made free to people, unless your company owned over 20 million, I think it was the cutoff point. Because I felt it was really important, because all the evidence from 1917 told us it's coming. So I present this, I have this presentation called the tidal wave. So, and that's it. And it's basically a picture of a giant tidal wave from that film. You remember The Storm? So you got this gigantic wave that comes in at the end, but in the middle of it, you've got this boat, and inside that, you've got the likes of, I think George Clooney was in that, and some others, and they're the people that are trapped. And what I'm trying to say was the pandemic, which you see there, where the people in it is a representative of what was happening, people being psychologically distressed by what was going on. The boat represents the depression or cost of living crisis, as we call it now. The tidal wave actually represents what we're seeing, 25% increase. Just to give you some numbers, when we first started out doing stuff on stress in 1998, within the UK, we had 9 million days lost to work-related stress. By 2004, we had 12.9 million. We put the management standards, which was our national approach, in place. By 2006, we were back down to 9.5 million. So doing something had an immediate impact. And then after that, though, we had the rise of the well-being movements that we've seen. You've seen the rise of many, I remember when I first started out, we used to look at crystals. That was the way you'd sort your stress out. And then as you've seen that over the course of, what are we now, the last 19 years, last year's data for the UK was 19.2 so million. So it's 19.2 million days lost.
Right. So do you think
that equates to 920,000 people?
Right. And so from the company's perspective that are looking at their own bottom line and their own, optimal performance, et cetera, do you find that more and more companies are realizing this is a competitive advantage to invest in the well-being of their employees and to try to create non-toxic workforces, but ones that are more mission aligned?
Yeah, I think what's happened with the well-being movement, and I mean, I've been there since the birth of it, is we've gone from what I thought was fundamentally a brilliant thing. I thought, that's it, we're on here, we're going to make a change. The world of work will be different, to actually bringing it right back down to the individual. The thing that always happens is you put the individual into an organization that's toxic, but you don't do anything about it, right? But because you don't do anything about it, you're saying, yeah, but I've made them resilient, I've made them mindful, I've given them well-being apps. But taking it back to the regulation and legislation, duty of care starts at the point that right? And you're required under most legislation to do a risk assessment. If you do a risk assessment and you identify risk and you do nothing about it, that's foreseeability. That's out the window. Compensation is awarded on a breach and the foreseeability of not managing that breach. So what we've found is with people doing this is that actually they're not looking at the bigger picture. For every person that goes off, it's 4 times the salary cost is what the loss is.
Yep. Right. Huge.
So
No, and
you're telling me you can't do anything, but you're on £60,000 a year and you've lost 30,000 because they've been off 6 months, and it's 120,000 for 6 months. Do you know what it doesn't quite tally up, does it?
yeah. No, I think to your point, because I was just reading an article, I think that you shared with me a bit of it about the, if you have a toxic pond, it's not the fish that needs to be taken care of. You've got to clear up the pond, right? And then they're in that environment where they can potentially thrive, and if there's issues with themselves.
Yeah, and that came after I was in a conference. Professor Kerry Cooper, one of the godfathers, of stress prevention, was in this meeting, and he said to me that they've just said that they want clean fish in their ponds, and he said you can't let them get away with that. And I just stood up and I went, do you know what? I've had loads of fish. I built a pond, and 6 weeks later, all the fish were dead. So I phoned the man that built the pond. His name's Pete, like me, Pete the pond man. And I said, Pete, you're giving me bad fish. The fish are dead. It's like a line from Monty Python, isn't it? And he came down and he said, Pete, the fish are dead not because they're bad fish. It's because you poisoned the pond because
right.
you didn't change.
Absolutely.
You didn't change the filter. So yeah,
absolutely.
So I said to him, it doesn't matter how strong your fish are, they're going to get ill.
Yes. Right. I was on a walk yesterday with the Real Mental Health Foundation, and there's the 500 plus ambassadors around the world doing these monthly walks. It was quite an interesting conversation because one of the women joining us was talking about her friend who was in a toxic work environment and felt compelled to work more and more long hours and harder. And so she ended up working like 90 hours a week. And the end result was that she was fired because at 90 hours a week too, her productivity, her concentration, her well-being was not optimal by a long shot. So her actual output was not where it would have been. And yet she was doing that because of this toxic culture. And, that she felt compelled to. So the real world implications for people, as we all know, are huge. And so these are huge. They're very important issues. And with this ISO 45003 as an important framework.
And the other thing, Jeff, how many of you done well-being surveys? And how many people, when you've done a well-being survey, are 100% happy with their well-being?
Yeah, no.
So if you want to go and inspect something, you ask for the risk assessments, but then you look at the well-being surveys and you say, so you got 35-40% of people saying they're not happy. Well, that's foreseeability. You got 40% of your workforce that are not happy. Do you see what I mean? It's that kind of.
Oh, absolutely. And I guess in tough job markets, obviously that's the problem because people feel trapped. There's not the flexibility to move out of a toxic culture necessarily. There's a whole bunch of other reasons that would keep them.
Toxic leads to one thing. It leads to a lack of profit.
Yeah, gret point. Plan final, so to speak.
Successful companies have successful workforces who are engaged. Those companies who think I'm going to beat whatever out of you, they come and go all the time. Unless your people are a part of your equation when you're designing the work that you're doing, then you're at your greatest loss. Because and what we're seeing now, Jeff, with the emergence of AI is this over reliance on AI, right? There have been 4 distinct revolutions of work. Okay, steam, electricity, the computers, and now we're moving into AI. All 4, including this one, have led to one thing: more work. more disengagement from your people. So AI will create more work, as well as the intricacies of designing jobs and stuff like that. And I think it's not a favorable thing, but unless we realize that AI and our people need to work together, that we
Yes.
design AI systems that are human, that have human sort of processing in there, that they aid and assist us. But I'm concerned that they might actually create, and I'm already seeing it from conversations there. People saying the AI system is generating all of this work and we don't know what to do.
No, absolutely. It's going to be a huge topic going forward. It already is. And that's why I think all of these conversations about mental health and all of the different pieces of creating structures and systems that provide resilience are critical and will be more so. I wanted to ask you also, or sorry, go
I
ahead.
worked on a technical project to do an AI system for counseling for people who've got mental health in work. We built an infrastructure was built and we put it together, did the evidence and that was there. And do you know what people said when it was reviewed? I want to talk to a person.
Yes, makes sense. Absolutely. Yeah. That's
So,
right.
But equally, young people don't like to engage in long conversations. So WhatsApp is useful in that respect, and other things where they can talk. But people really want to know that there's somebody at the end of the line.
Yes, absolutely. No, absolutely. Let me ask you if you can share a little bit or talk a little bit about the BS 30480 suicide in the workplace.
Yes.
You can
So
talk to our audience a bit about that.
So this is a British standard, so that they're different from an ISO. So it's a standard developed in Britain, a voluntary standard, so not a defined standard, as we mentioned before. And it looks at the prevention and promotion of supporting people who might be going through or have experienced suicide. And it's not just the people, it's what the organization needs to do when you've had either a suicide in the organization, or you have someone who's got suicidal ideation. Now, many things in the realm of suicide have assumed you can't talk to people who are suicidal. Truth is, you can and you should be having conversations. You should be asking people, "Hey, is there anything we can do? How can I help?" You don't seem yourself, and the statement, those myths that are there, we've tried to address to say what the reality is. Many of the suicides that you do see, there's a point where you could have intervened or could have had an introduction. So having these systems in place is really important, and it's broken down to things like culture, interventions are things that you can do. It's broken down to defining what suicide looks like, defining what suicidal ideation is, defining the act that's there, and it's now been downloaded, something in the region of 5,000 downloads, 75 countries in the course of 6 weeks. Okay,
That's great.
So ISO 45003. It took many months to get to that level. So there is a desperate need for advice on what you should do, and it's written in plain language. So I was the convener of the drafting panel, and at the very outset, I said, remember who this is for. It's not for experts. It's not for us that have knowledge. It's for those who are suddenly getting a call and going, what do I do when I've got someone who's shared that they're having suicidal ideation, or I've just had a suicide. What are the first things I should be doing? So it helps people recognizing that if you change the culture, you make it okay for people to talk about mental health, part of the mental health ISO 45003 journey, and you make it that actually people, once they've shared that, there is a process and a system that kicks into place that says, right, so we know this is here. what do we do? So the guide gives you information about what the things you should be thinking about doing. If you've got someone who has expressed suicidal thoughts, you don't just simply register it. There are certain things you should be doing, okay, which is to work. And then when you've had a suicide, there's practical things to talk about as well. You know what I mean? Suicides are unexpected. Don't stop the salary of a person immediately, because the family will need some finances to get through what this very unexplained and unexpected. So it's little things like that allow people to grieve in their own way. Look at the systems around you and think, what can we do? What do we put in place? How are we going to support our people? How are we going to support the family of the bereaved? But also, what do we do? What can we learn from this going forward? That means that it doesn't happen again.
And is BS 30480? I mean, is that the latest iteration? And if so, how often are these revised with the latest thinking and the latest data?
Yeah, so it came out 6 weeks ago, and it's the first standard, standard on suicide prevention and intervention. So no other standards body has taken it on board. So we've taken it on board on the basis that it's for the UK, but it's sufficiently robust because of the evidence that's in there through the work we did when we were doing the drafting, that it could form the basis of an international, an ISO, which would then mean going back into this consultation process and going on a more wider scale. The need is there. The suicides that we're talking about is a global picture that the World Health Organization talks about. Depression and anxiety, it's a global problem. It's not going to go away. So that there's so much, the need for both ISO 45003 at this time is very pivotal, but also to put this standard on suicide in there. And I would hope within a few years we might be in a position where it's taken on board as an international. But that would mean we'd have to go into negotiation and conversation with 75 to 80 different countries.
Yeah. Right. Big project. I wanted to ask you a bit about stigma. The podcast itself has a mission to try to help shatter stigma as really the baseline, to take a bit of weight off of people so that they don't feel the shame or any reason to hold themselves back when they're having some serious challenges, mental health challenges, or dealing with conditions. And I'm wondering, with all of the work that you have done and that you do, and then, unfortunately, the increasing numbers, et cetera, what do you see as, the role of stigma in, unfortunately, keeping people from seeking a hand up? And are you optimistic that through conversations like this and so many others, and organizations like yours, and all sorts of groups, the Real Mental Health Foundation, and many, that we're getting more authentic as societies now?
I think what we're doing is we've raised the exposure of mental health, and we've talked about it during lockdown, and we've had multiple people more open and confident to talk about it. The stigma itself is multifaceted, isn't it? So if you've got press that continually concentrate on the negative around mental health, then that doesn't help. The press we worked on for a number of years, and you now do get more positive stories. We have to recognize that there are certain sectors which do have higher rates of mental health issues and suicide. Now, so particularly in suicide, construction is 3 times the average for an occupation, and that's pretty much wherever you go. And that's because a lot of men have not been encouraged to talk about mental health, and they're not encouraged to share how they feel. And yet we go to a football match, an American football match, or a football, e.g. soccer over here, and they score a goal, and the same people will hug the person next to them. And it's actually so it's embedded in this real men don't talk or real men don't cry. And so I think in tackling stigma, we have to look at those areas where we have, the potential of some social system that says it's not right to talk. It's, men have to block it up. Men have to keep it in, and that is not the case. Unfortunately, what we have seen since lockdown is an increase in suicide in younger people as well. In the past, it was always age numbers were 40 to about 55. The World Health Organization is now saying that suicides occurring bigger and more in those who are 25 and under. This is looking at working age, obviously. So I think we've still got work to do. For me, my role in the role of the business is to tackle that. Is to say, yeah, be real about it. Guess what? Your whole self might be, I'm not in a great place. And that's fine, because the organization can manage that. If we make these conversations normal, like through the work and where we met, through the being real, then we can make a difference. Men and women can talk and do talk. There's some powerful stories of people that have found their way through a crisis and come through the other end. But that's because I think we're open and candid about it. So stigma will persist in society because it's been a societal issue. But it's our decision to accept it or challenge it or question it or put something in place to make it different. I'm 58 and I've been doing this for 27 years. If you told me 27 years ago, we would have seen a doubling of mental health cases, and that actually we would actually have even done a standard on psychosocial risk, which ISO 45001 is. They wouldn't believe it, and it's taken us this long to decide to get to the point where we're going. We need to do a standard on suicide prevention and education.
And prevention, and as you were referring to that, I mean, in terms of for businesses, for investors, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Pound is 16 ounces, so the math always works. I mean, prevention is profitable, and it is so much better for the affected parties, the individuals involved in this, and there are ways to structure that. So I wanted to ask you if you'd like to share an example or two of within your own company now. You're the founder and director of the Being Real Workplace and Mental Health Solutions. You've touched on it a little bit, but if there's any other story or stories you might want to talk about, and something that's encouraging to you as well, because the work that you're doing obviously is affecting or, trying to be a catalyst to affect positive change. And I think for all of us, for this podcast and the people I bring on, et cetera, we're hoping to continue to bring forward those to shine lights on with an optimistic view and realistic with challenges, but to things that are working and things that are quite positive and encouraging.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I do is I do a gap analysis. I go into your organization, have a look at what you've got. There's assumption that what you've got gets through to who you think it does, whereas in fact the reality might be that something in the system stops that from occurring. So I think there's for me, I've gone into organizations, they've said, well, we've got this, and this. And I've said, oh, that's brilliant. But what about this? What do you need to do there? And actually, I'm more positive about than I am negative that, when I do go into the organization, many people don't think they've got stuff. And that's what they want to call it, stuff. But they do. But understanding how all of that fits in the management of psychosocial hazards and risks, and in what you do with suicide is really important. So I know organizations that don't just give you a pizza at 11 o'clock in the morning, and when your lunch break isn't until 1. they bring you a hot pizza at 1 o'clock. That's like, it's a very simple illustration of what happens when we do things because they're tokenistic. Yeah. Well-being is a right principle to do at work, but it doesn't have to be tokenistic. Well-being should be about how do we make the job that this person's doing allow them to go home the same as when they came in, or better. Yeah. Rather than the job making you sick. So well-being isn't just about mindfulness and resilience, head massages and fruit bowls. It's actually more about those principles, financial, physical, psychological, all of those components. That's what make up well-being. And if you don't focus them at the individual, but you focus them at what they're doing in the organization, in the system, then that works better. So where I've seen it work is when people realize that well-being is an intricate part of their system, but it's about what we can do to make the workplace a better place to work. When you're looking for a company and you're going through the gap analysis and you're looking at the different elements of what they've got, people are surprised that actually they might have more information than they know because it's somewhere else, and it's aligning everything. What you need when people are in crisis is the ability to, or not in crisis, but in need, is the ability to find information quickly, and it needs to be relevant to them. So I've been fortunate to see some, really engaged, incredible sort of stuff that's happening, and watch. I mean, before I had my company, I was working at HSE. I remember a utilities company put a head shed, which was a wooden shed on the back of a trailer, and they put it in their head office, and you could go in and talk about your mental health. It's called the head shed. Now the operators, or field operators, came into the head office and said, well, why can't we have the head shed? So do you know what they did? They put the head shed on the back of a small pickup, and they took the head shed out to where the field operators were working in fields, because they were working on electric pylons. And it was a very practical, useful illustration. Now, I've always encouraged people, if you're going to do well-being, do it creatively. Yeah. If you're going to pay 50 cents for an app that's been produced without any evidence, you're not going to necessarily get what you need. If you're prepared to invest, and people say, well, I can't afford to invest, it's 1 to 4, right? It's 1 to 4 of your salary cost. What happens if you're an investment banker, Jeff?
Yeah, absolutely.
And your salary is around is several million, and you're off for 6 months, and you're thinking, I've lost this much. Well, when you times it by 4, that's the reality of the cost. Sick people who go off because we don't do things earlier cost a lot more.
Yes, absolutely.
In a very practical sense. And I know it's like, and we are talking about people here, but what I'm trying to say is, these people say, I can't afford to do something now, don't realize.
Absolutely. They can't afford not to.
Yeah.
Well, Peter, we've covered a lot of ground, and I wanted to ask you if there's anything else you'd like to highlight or bring up. And, as I mentioned, and as we do with all of our podcast guests, I'm going to share information on YouTube so that, people who have enjoyed and are interested in some of the work you're doing would be able to connect with you. But I just wanted to invite you to, if there's anything else you'd like to talk about, or if there's any kind of last a few words that you'd like to share with the audience.
Yeah, I mean, as my dad said, let's get real. Let's be real on mental health at work. Let's stop putting it in the too hard category. Let's not accept people getting ill and dying from suicide because of work as the norm. And I'm not saying it is the norm. I'm just saying we have to look at this like we look at any other safety issue in the workplace. The consequences are significant. Normally about 20% of sickness absence is down to safety related behavior, can be in some cases. So when you're looking at an accident and you're looking at the amount of days lost, there are more days lost to health issues, and yet we don't always prioritize that.
Yeah.
And we have to, and come along. As you said, with me, this is part of my mission. It's, and I just deeply don't feel people should go home ill from work.
Absolutely.
I don't accept it as an outcome, and I shouldn't,
Yes.
and I don't want to accept it as an outcome, because I don't want to live in a world where I think that the world is, So there you go.
Absolutely. Well, Peter, thank you so much for sharing, your work, your expertise, the different vision you have in this space, and much appreciated. And look forward to, and happy holidays to you and yours, and look forward to speaking again sometime soon.
Yeah, absolutely. And come over and see my podcast as well, the Being Real podcast.
Absolutely.
We'll do swapsies. So brilliant.
Great. Thanks very much, Peter. Take care.